department wanted to get involved and help because there were kids who were being affected. Whether, if there was something demonic or not, the kids were being affected, and we wanted to do whatever we could to help.
Father, can you tell us the basic background of the case and getting involved, and then how you came to be involved? So you're going to talk for a long time now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, basically, I became involved. I covered for the Catholic priest hospital chaplain for the Methodist hospital system, both in Maryville and Gary. He's off on Friday and Saturday. And so it was Friday morning when he was off by my call. And I had my normal Bible study class. And I got a call from the Methodist chaplain there. And he says, you're the Catholic priest on call. You need to come over here and do an exorcism. And I said, well, it doesn't really quite work that way. Why are you saying that? And he said, several professional people just called us. They were in the emergency room, and they saw a 9-year-old boy walk up the wall backwards, holding his grandmother's hand, flipped over her head, sat down, turned toward the others that were in the room, and kind of gave this demonic, rich-like grin with his eyes being white. And they ran out of the room, and they went and got security, and security came in and heard the story. They called the police, and from that, the chaplain, and then they called me. And I said, yeah, well, if professional people witness that, then there is something serious there. But before we could do anything, I have to conduct an investigation to get permission from my bishop to allow for an exorcism to happen. But I'm willing to do that. And so they gave me, I gave them my contact information, give it to the family, and I said probably the first time I'll be able to really make contact with them is after my weekend duties, which I have a 5 o'clock Mass on Sunday evening, so sometime after 6 o'clock Sunday evening. And so they said that would be fine to come on over. But in the meantime, the 3 children were taken by Child Protective Services from the mother and the grandmother. One was placed in a lockdown psychological unit in Westville, I believe, or maybe Wheatville. And then the other 2 were put in with the Carmelite Sisters in East Chicago, which watches over, foster care type of children. And so that's when I became involved and went to the house itself. Now the family wasn't living there for about a month or so. They had things were revving up almost exponentially to the point that drove them out of the house. And so they went to stay at Latoya's brother or Rosa's son's house in Gary with the family. But the children were also, it was around Easter time, and so they were kind of gone for quite some time before and after, and never came back to school and such. And that's when Child Protective Services got involved. And they wanted to take the children to their doctor to investigate, to see, because they thought some foul play or some abuse or something like that. Because the children would often come to school, and in the middle of class, one of them would get a bloody nose or bloody lips or bloody gums or something, go to the nurse's office or complain about a headache or a stomach ache or something, and they would always go to the nurse's office, and the nurse couldn't find anything wrong. I mean, the blood, would stop bleeding, and they looked, and they couldn't find any scars or anything. So whenever the nurse would see the kids, they were fine. And so so the Child Protective Services wanted them to go to their family doctor. And that was the day before the incident at the hospital occurred. And it was in the doctor's office that all of a sudden the two boys started to act up. And the one, now what would always kind of occur with the children, it would like jump from one child to the other. It would never, the two or three children would never be, manifesting anything at the same time. One would start, and then usually the child may fall asleep or something, and it jump to the next one, then to the next one. And it would always kind of be a series of things. And at this particular time in the doctor's office, the one boy, I don't know which one, they were kind of, I think 7, 9, and 11 at that time. The girl was the oldest at 11. So one of the two boys would start kind of growling and showing his teeth or grinning or, and shaking his head, and sometimes his eyes would go kind of a white. And he will say, it's time for everyone to die, or I'm going to kill everyone, or things like that, say a lot of things. And then all of a sudden, the doctor, when they called him in to look at this, and when that happened, the one boy was picked up and thrown against the wall and then went unconscious. And when he was unconscious, then the second boy started to do the same thing. And then they were getting kind of, male staff and such to try to restrain him and such, and he then kind of went unconscious. And they couldn't get either of the boys to revive. They were knocked out. And so that's when they called the ambulances to come and pick them up and take them to Methodist Hospital Gary emergency room. And that's, and once they were in the emergency room, the one boy, the youngest one I know, who was 7 years old, it took 5 male nurses or orderlies or security or 5 very strong guys to try to hold this 7-year-old down on the bed or gurney or, in the emergency room there. And then all of a sudden, once they got him calmed down, that's when it jumped to the boy in the other emergency room. And all of a sudden, he started to kind of act up the way he usually kind of does. And his grandma was holding his hand and trying to coax him back. He was a 9-year-old. And she was kind of walking him backwards toward the wall, saying his name to come on back. And all of a sudden he started walking up the wall backwards, went over her head, and flipped over. Some say, he was walking on the ceiling, but it seems like it was a flip over. And all three kind of described it in a very little different way. One says it's kind of skating up the wall, or lifting up the wall, or skating backwards. The other was, he's walking up backwards. So they had a slightly different way of saying it. And some said he was walking on the seat, kind of walk on the seat, and others said he kind of flipped over her. So there's enough, different ways of perceiving it that seems to authentically see the same thing from their own perspectives, describing it, this same basic thing in their own ways. And that was the thing that certainly would catch up. The national news was because it was the grandmother, there was a person from Child Protective Services. In fact, she was the head of that division, so she took this case personally until she quit on it. And then there was a male nurse, and I believe there was also a psychological doctor also called in. But he didn't witness it, but he did try to get the boy to tell him how he did what he did. And when he was lucid, he said, no, I can't walk up a wall backwards, how'd you, and they were asking how he did that, and he says, so he had no recollection of actually doing that.
So when you said your colleague, another priest, contacted you.
He wasn't a priest, he was a Methodist.
Oh, was a chaplain at the
chaplain at the hospital, Methodist chaplain.
And so after he contacted you, you went to the house to talk to the family?
Yeah, that was on Friday morning, and the family got back hold of me, and we found that the best time to meet would be at the house at 6:30 Sunday evening.
Oh, and you would want to bless the house?
I came to bless the house. But that's the first thing we do, just to bless the house, and then just to see if it manifests anything, if anything would happen. Nothing happened. The blessing was done at 6:30. Then I began to get their whole story, and so I was just pretty much taking notes on how they were describing. They moved into the house in November of 2011, and the first things they kind of noticed was, it was November, but there's a lot of house flies, especially in the porch, that seemed to be all over the place, and the next day they'll all be dead, and she'll sweep them all up and, throw them out. And then the next day it'll be a whole mess and more flies.
Like the Amityville Horror.
So that kind of had that.
About, right?
It kind of reminded them of that. And after that, she started to get, it would be the blood episodes and such. One kid would wake up with bloody, a nosebleed or lips bleeding or gums bleeding or something. Blood would be on their pillowcase and such. And, they were kind of, but they could never figure that out, because whenever anyone would ever examine it, there was nothing, nothing there. So, and then she started to get sick herself with 3 different kidney problems. And she went to the doctor 3 different times. But she would fill her kidneys, and they would do tests and not find anything wrong. But it would be 3 different times, and this is probably about January this was happening. Then probably you're getting to about February now, and they would one time, the grandmother from her bedroom saw a person pacing back and forth in the living room. And so she got out to see who it was and flipped on the lights, and no one was there. But there was like muddy boot prints back and forth on their living room hardwood floor. And then later on, they would hear this dog barking. Before that, they would hear foot, like boot steps coming up from the basement into the kitchen. And they would walk out to see who's making these, and they couldn't find anyone. And so they eventually put a lock on the door from the inside to the basement door. And then at times they would hear a big knocking on the door, and then they would run over, flip open the lock and look in and not see anything. And then later on they would hear dogs barking and do the same thing, but find no dogs. Or hear a dog scratching on the door, but find nothing. Then one of the youngest boy, the one that did get locked up into the psychological unit, would spend time in LaToya's closet talking to what they thought was an imaginary friend, but the imaginary friend was always talking about what it's like to die, and what it's like to be killed, and things like that. And he was telling them that, and they never saw anyone and such. And he kept telling that story, and that's what kind of led him to be examined psychologically. And it would be in that same closet that would be that final thing when they would see this like 7-foot black monster. They just kind of call him a black monster, had red eyes, And that when they saw it in the, and the reason they saw it in the room was actually they were sitting watching TV, and this Febreze bottle lifts up, goes in front of them back and forth, and it is thrown into Latoya's room. It hits the lamp, knocks it down, and so they walk in. This, it sounded like a crash, like it really broke it. It just knocked it to the floor. And so they saw it there, and then they looked into the closet, door was open, and saw that thing. They just ran, grabbed all their clothes and such, and
that's
got
why
it.
they left the house.
So that was the last thing that put them out of the house. Now that was a little bit, maybe a couple weeks after the big incident. Now when I was conducting the investigation, I was, nothing really happened until about 2 hours into it. It was now dark. It was April 22nd, and so about 8:30ish or so, it was dark, and I noticed something strange about her ex-boyfriend, and what happened before things really got revved up. The reason, well, I never knew exactly why she broke up with him. I would find it out later. But she mentioned, because I was asking her, when did things really rev up? And she said the boyfriend came, now she was at work, and the grandmother was at home, and he came in and wanted to give the children, the two boys, something. And Rosa called Latoya and said, he's here and he wants to give them something. What does he want to give them? And she said, he wants to give them each $5 a piece. And she said, okay, that's all right. And so he gave them $5 a piece, but tell them to go. And so he went. But I found that kind of strange, okay, because he didn't give anything to the girl. And I asked him why, and accordingly, he said that it was because the girl didn't need anything to be good, but the boys needed to be bribed to be good. So I found that a little strange, and so I wanted to know what that was about. Because about 3 days after the boyfriend incident is when it really started to rev up in the family. That Saturday, they had a family get-together, and their whole family was there, and all of a sudden, the girl, they were all sitting in the living room and such, and the girl looked like she got pulled off the couch and ended up on the floor. And everyone was saying, what are you doing? And he says, someone pulled me off the couch. And he says, who pulled you off the couch? And then all of a sudden she's complaining, I got stomach pains, I feel sick, and such. So they took her into her bedroom and were trying to comfort her, and is she nauseous and things. And then the grandmother goes into the kitchen to go and get a washcloth, and she's wetting the washcloth when one of the other boys goes flying into the freezer. Now they didn't have room in the kitchen for the freezer, so it's right in the entrance in the living room. And she turns around and says, what happened to you? And he goes, someone just threw me into the freezer. Who did that? And then he started to complain about, the same type of things, stomach ailments and such. And so he took him to his bed, and then we're trying to deal with him. And then as they were, the families focusing on him, all of a sudden the third boy was in the bathroom, and he comes flying out of the bathroom, like he's thrown out of the bathroom. And they all turn around and say, what happened to you? And he said, someone threw me out of the bathroom. Then he complained about the same types of things. And by that time, the whole family's leaving, the guests and such. And so they said, no, we're not going to deal with all this. This is bizarre. And so
all of this activity that you're talking about, probably most people would say, like, oh, that's crazy, that didn't happen. We're all paranormal investigators.
Yeah.
So we would say, well, that sounds like a haunting or poltergeist activity around one of the kids. But you obtained permission to actually do exorcisms.
Oh.
And we had a really nice conversation on the phone and when I interviewed you for my book, My Theory, a couple years ago. And it was so fascinating because you explained to me that it was because of two things that you found in the situation that allowed you to get that permission for the exorcism, leading you to believe that there had been a demonic influence invited into the house and onto LaToya. So two different situations, both having to do with, one having to do with the boyfriend, and the other with LaToya, and the other having to do with things that you found in the basement in the house, which led you to believe that activity had gone on there that had invited something very specific into the family and into the house.
Actually, I kind of knew there was something demonic right from when you have three professional people see a levitation.
Right.
The boy walked up. There was no real explanation for that.
And that was all in the case?
Yeah, that was what got me started. So I already knew there was something serious with that, because unless the only possible is if the grandmother and the boy were somehow doing some sort of gymnastic, thing, which that was pretty clear that they weren't, she's not that prone to even try to even do anything like that. So that would have been, and that was kind of ruled out because when the policemen were investigating, they were asking him how he did that, and he had no recollection of it. So if he kind of being an 9-year-old, he probably would have showed them, oh, this is how we did it, or but he had no idea. He was kind of, I did that. He was shocked still.
But you said the boyfriend had come to the house, had asked for things like photographs, and there were photographs missing, and there were items of clothing missing from the family, leading you to believe that there had been perhaps a curse or a spell that was put on LaToya by, I think you said, the new girlfriend, maybe the new girlfriend of the...
No, actually it was his wife, boyfriend's wife.
Oh, that's right. He was cheating on his wife with LaToya.
LaToya, and she found out, and that's actually why she moved into the house, because he was kind of stalking her, but he followed her home from work and found out where she was living, and so that didn't quite work. They thought, okay, he doesn't know where I'm living, but now one of our solutions was to have them move to Indianapolis, and make sure he has no idea, because she had a brother who had an apartment, lived in an apartment in Indianapolis, and there was an opening in one of the apartments, and so they decided to do that, but make sure no one can tell him where, or else he's going to try to follow her there. So that's what we, decided on doing. I was going to bless the house and with salt and everything. It was Mother's Day weekend, in fact, of 2012. She just moved in, and I thought, okay, everything's fine. But she called me up the next day, saying she was kept awake the whole time, dreaming of her boyfriend raping her, cussing at her, beating her. She would wake up and then go back to sleep, and it would just, something different would start like that. And it just went on all night. And I go, oh boy. So that looked like a pretty serious curse. And so it was more, and so I was able to find her without him even knowing where she was. So.
And the police came into the house with you to investigate. Len, do you remember when that happened?
Yes, I do.
Were you there?
I was not there.
It was Captain Austin from the Gary department that seemed to represent the department.
Yeah, I know Captain Austin.
And you found under the basement stairs some other strange things.
Yeah, when I went through the house to bless it, there was, it looked like a concrete poured, a basement. I didn't look under the steps, so I didn't know anything. But the policemen, when they went in, and I went in on Sunday, they came in on a Wednesday, and they told me that there was a cutout area underneath the steps. And I said, "Oh, wow! I think we have to dig that up. It was all sandy and such to see what's there." But it was, it could be a crime scene. So they said that they're going to do that. And so we had to, it was, when we got around to doing that, she already moved out of the apartment, the house, and moved into her apartment. And so I think when we finally got permission from the landlord to do that, and they also had to get a dog. They wanted a cadaver dog to also go through the house and see whatever was there. There was only one cadaver dog in this whole area, which is in Chicago, and police department. They said, well, that's usually used for big fields and such. If you're just doing a house, any dog will smell human remains or anything. So they got their own police dog to do that. And so this was Wednesday after Mother's Day. And we had Captain Austin, there was a lieutenant from the Lake County Police, and also the chief of police in Ammons. Now, when he became chief of police, before he was that, he was in charge of a Paul Trump in Ammons. And because around Wolf Lake, there was, they were seeing altars and mangled animals and different things. And so he covered that case by accident, and then became kind of the expert of the area for that. When he became chief of police, he needed to hand that down to someone else, so he decided a partner that kind of helped him was Lieutenant from Lake County Police. And so he came, but he came to be also involved. So the three went through the house, and then they were documenting a crime scene if need be. Now, when the dog came through, there was no reaction, and so they then started digging underneath the stairs, and there was nothing but sand, but the sand was royal, so it looked like it was dug up. And then about 2 feet deep, they started to find the first series of 3 objects, and the first thing they found was like a fingernail. And they weren't sure if it was a fake fingernail that was painted or if it was a real fingernail yet. So they saw a fingernail painted, a red painted fingernail. And then the next thing they started to find was a pair of woman's undergarments, panties or skirt or something. It was pretty. It seemed to be very old Depression era or War era. It was cotton, brown from the sand and such, and kind of a little bit torn up, So then now they were a little more concerned there, and then let's see, I found one other. Let's see what it was. It's been a long time. There was a third thing they found. Oh, it was like this oval red lid, and it looked like to a tea kettle or something, or a container, an oval container, and they were looking for that, but couldn't find anything, so they found that. Then about 2.5 feet deep, they found another series of things, and the first thing seemed to be this very heavy weight, and it had a little hook on it. So they were trying to figure out what it was, because it was very corroded, metal, heavy, weighed about 10 pounds, they're about this long. And we're thinking, is this a way to a grandfather's clock? And he said, well, Kevin also said, well, in these Gary homes, they would kind of use these weights to hold down cords for draperies, or else it could be inside, to open up a counterweight to a window. So it'd be one of those two things. And we're kind of thinking, well, this might be something, because the next thing we found was 2 pair of socks, but it only had the ankle portion is what we saw. Now, we didn't really, because we saw the frayed end and then a very clean end. So we were thinking the frayed end is what they cut off the foot portion of it, and the clean end, was the top of the sock. It's only later when we were examining it with Zach that we actually pulled out the foot portion was stuffed inside the ankle portion. So actually we had it kind of backwards. We never really, we just saw an ankle portion. And it was a cotton sock, boy's sock, not like polyester or stripes or anything. It seemed to be, again, around the 40s or, 30s or somewhere around there. And then the third thing we found was what was kind of getting us concerned, because all of a sudden we seen this long, looked like a bone. And so now they're being very careful, taking pictures and sweeping out.
A bone.
Looked like a bone. It was the color of a bone. And but eventually they tapped it, it's on its plastic, and they pulled it up, and it was one of these old-time shoe horns, but it was broken in half and lengthwise. And so it was these 3 things, these 2 sets of 3 things that kind of made us think, well, maybe a boy was, playing around with this counterweight on the, and it either hit the wall and knocked him in the head, or wrapped around his neck and choked him, or somehow killed him. And so they were trying to use these things he was wearing or using at the time that, the family was trying to, conjure him off by what's called necromancy. And the same thing would have been done later to the older woman. Because one thing that was, along with the boy, that the little guy, that the youngest one would see, they also would come home from school, and in the backyard, they saw this old lady in kind of white. And they would go into the backyard and say, "What are you doing in our backyard?" And she would turn around, and she had red eyes. And then they ran into the house and told their mom or grandmother or something. There's a lady with red eyes, but when they went out there, she was gone. And they saw that twice, but only the kids saw it, no one else. So we kind of think those 2 things connected to what was buried in the basement.
Sorry. So you get permission to do the exorcism. You do the series of exorcisms on the children.
No, actually, we could
only
never.
on Latoya?
No, the kids were taken away, and so. And the reason I kind of discovered, because I just thinking it was on the children. That's
Right.
the whole stories they were telling. And then all of a sudden, a series of things were happening. First of all, they were kind of alerting me to the boyfriend. But then all of a sudden, footprints started to appear around her. And they pointed down, and I saw these footprints, and then I felt them, and they were wet. But they were just around her, So I was looking, did I make those when I came out, really from the door, or from the bathroom when I went there, or from the kitchen? And no, they were just around
And that
her.
was the same thing that they had happening all the way in the beginning, the wet footprints in the house.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you got, the policeman seen that. They didn't, because.
No, but the Latoya or her mom.
Oh, no, they mentioned,
Right,
blueprints
yeah.
and things. They saw things. And I saw it, and it was wet, and I could not find a source of them, because I don't remember seeing them before, and they were around her. And then, all of a sudden, she started to feel cold, and so she went into her bedroom to get a blanket. She put it over her, and all of a sudden, she throws the blanket outside, burning up. And then she said, "Oh man, my head is hurting." And then I said, I wonder, have you been affected by these things? And I brought my crucifix, and so I asked if, do you mind if I put it on her head? And she said, okay. And I put it on her head, she began to convulse, and I took it off, and she stopped convulsing. And I said, ooh, you are possessed. You know, that's an aversion to a religious object. And then I asked the grandmother, could I do the same test on her? And she said, okay. And she said, I don't think I ever, experienced any of this. So I did the same thing for her, and she was fine. So, and then at that time, Latoya was really getting sick, and this is about 4 hours into it. It's about 10:30. And so I said, we need to figure out what's with your boyfriend, the ex-boyfriend and all that, and I'll call you and we'll work that out later. And so I concluded the investigation there.
So you did the exorcism of Latoya at your church?
I did. Since I never did an exorcism before, and I presented this all to my bishop once I had all the evidence, and he didn't want to give permission. First of all, there is an exorcist in Chicago, Archdiocese of Chicago. There's also one in the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, where she also lives. And so he wanted me to consult with them first. And so I talked to the one in Indianapolis, since he's there and, and everything. And now we've been working on this investigation for 6 weeks. Her children are taken from her. And so she needed to have this done in order to get her children back, And so I went to talk with him. He says, I'll send you all the information I have. And she's very anxious to get started on this. And he told me, no, I start from scratch. And he said, it's been 6 weeks, And he said, no, I just do my own investigations and stuff. So I told her that, and she said, I'm going to go through all this, and he's over there, and everything's here, and, So we, and then I went and talked to the one in the Archdiocese. And basically I was looking for a ritual and how to do this and what to do. And they both kind of recommended that I do a minor exorcism first in the home and just go through the rite one time and see if it takes care of the problem, good, you don't have to bother the bishop again. If not, then you have to. And so we agreed to do that. So I did the minor exorcism without his permission, just again going through the rite. And the main thing that was her reaction was whenever you put the crucifix on her forehead, she convulsed. And so what I was going to do is to keep it on, and what they kind of told me to look for is either if it gets worse and worse, keep it on till it leaves, or if it fades, then leaves that way. But if it's consistent, don't, you'll end up injuring her, So kind of don't go more than a minute or so. And so I did that and on and on and on, and there was just no change. And I took it off and decided to do it a second time to see if any difference, a little less, longer, and then the third time, and there's just no change, And so I decided, yeah, there's something there, but this is not working. And so, they told me that I could get the ritual from the internet, because at that time there was a new rite, but all the exorcists who were complaining about it says, they made it very nice, it sounds beautiful, beautiful language, and you could do it in English, but I mean, you're trying to charm the demon out. That's not going to work, you be polite and all that. So and it took away a lot of the things that seemed to be most effective, like using the eye, because it hates human beings telling it that if you say in the name of Jesus, leave and all that, and they were doing it was all in the name of Jesus, but they took all the I exercise you, I propel you, command you, and things like that. And so they were complaining, and that's what really aggravates it, So I decided, they were going to look into the whole thing, redo it, but now they removed all the rules, and now you could go back to the old rite. You could do it in Latin, English, you could use the new rite if you want and such. But you could get this stuff from the internet. There's no ritual right now because it's all in flux. So I went and downloaded everything from the internet, told the bishop all that, and he finally did give permission for me to do it. And that was on a Wednesday in just before June 1st. Was the first one we did on a Friday. And so we did it in the church. And as it turned out, when I got to the part with putting the crucifix on his head, or her head, nothing happened. You know. So we went through the whole rite and nothing happened. And so we went, oh, I must have left, you know, before we got to that part. It didn't, you know, I said, that was the easiest one ever, you know. So we didn't, so we thought, oh, okay, well, that's over with, I guess. But then when we went, before she couldn't have any religious objects on her, so she was now able to wear, you know, crucifixes. We gave her a rosary, and this is a very heavy Benedictine rosary, and so she could hold it, she could touch it, and such. And so she took it and got in her car and went back to Indianapolis. And then as we were walking across the parking lot, we saw shiny things. And then we looked where she was kind of parked, and we saw the rosary that we gave her in like torn to pieces in 5 different parts. And so we collected up all the parts, make sure we had everything, put it all together. We didn't put it together there, but we wanted to make sure we had everything. And so we had the whole complete rosary there. And then my assistant was going to take it back, put it back together. And she calls the next day and says, you know, I'm missing the rosary you gave me. And I said, yeah, we had it. It was on the parking lot. You know, so she was looking all over in her purse. She thought she put it in her purse in the parking lot, but she must have drove away. Couldn't get into her purse, and she was looking all over her car, and she couldn't find it anywhere. And I said, yeah, it was torn to pieces, and we put it back together. So we think there's something still there.
We have to wrap up really quickly. I know we just got started. How long did it take from when you started that first day until she was well enough to go on with the life back in Indianapolis?
Yeah, we did 2 more exorcisms. The next one, we did find a name. And once we used the name, she fell asleep. It aggravated and then kind of mitigated, and then finally she fell asleep. And then we did a 3rd one, and that one she wanted to do in Latin. And so we did that one in Latin, and it seemed the same thing came to happen, even though we didn't have a name. And it seemed to be several of them left. You know, there was different times that she would kind of be fine, and then all of a sudden something would, so we kept on going through it. And then eventually she fell asleep, and that was kind of the sign that everything was done. And so, you're never quite sure when everything is gone, So we kind of going to schedule another one, and that one was the last Friday in June. It was 4th of July coming up, and so we were either going to do it around 4th of July when she's home or in the weekend. And she was going to get back with us with her schedule. We were kind of checking with everyone else on the team and seeing when they could do it. And so we had a couple times set up, and she was going to get back with us, and she never did. And so we never heard anything since. And the next time she would call us would have been in October, when she was going to have her hearing with the court to get her children back. And so she asked for a rosary, and I said, okay, come after your court hearing, and I'll give you one. And so she never showed up, and so I never knew what happened. And it would only be when the reporter told the story that that hearing, cleared her to get her children back. She got the children back in November, and everything's been fine since. So
So we heard that, so of course Zach Bagans bought the house. And we heard that he was filming his documentary about the story.
Uh-huh.
And then, of course, we found out that he tore the house down. We heard also, I heard rumors that at least LaToya, did she come back to work on this documentary?
No, he could never get her to.
Oh, okay.
And that was a big
I don't know if you guys
problem.
heard the rumors that she came back to work on the documentary and then she became possessed again. That's what I heard.
Oh no, that was another Indianapolis family that lived in the house before her at some point, and he was able to track them down, brought them over, and they walked down into the house, and then they were attacked in the basement.
Really?
And something attached to the teenage girl, and they went home. And Zach was very much concerned, and he said, something that the girls went crazy, and they want whatever's attached to her out. And I said, okay, well, I don't need permission because I could do, anything with this case I could do now. I have permission from the bishop. So let's just bring her back. And I think there was all kinds of crazy things that were happening. Their car wouldn't start, or they had to find another car to get over there. I think Zach actually had to go over and get them and bring them in. So, and we did one exorcism on her, and
So
since
this
it
was
was
a completely different person.
so this is a completely different person. So that was my second one.
Exclusive, guys.
And it just took once, just going through it the right once, because it was very quick, since it kind of just jumped, whatever it jumped into her, so it wasn't, embedded, and such. So it was simple to get out. And,
So when is the movie coming out?
yeah, now Zach, he was wanting to get it at the Sundance Film Festival, but they said that your editing's not good. I said, it might be good for Ghost Adventures, but this is a movie, in full length, 2 hours, and you need to, have this profession. This should be golden, and you're kind of, so he got a professional. He's paying big bucks for a professional documentarian to re-edit the whole thing and make it, because he does want it to win awards. I mean, you don't want to mess this up. So
I have to tell you, Father, that it was, it was the summer after the story came out, or maybe it was 2 years later, after the house was boarded up, after Zach moved out, boarded it up. And we did a haunted tour of Gary, guys, remember?
Mm-hmm.
And we went up to the house and we were taking pictures there. And who was it that went and looked in the mailbox?
oh,
Someone went and looked in the mailbox, and there was an envelope in the mailbox that was addressed to Zach Fagan.
That sounds like Dad.
Zach Fagan, it does sound like he would do that, right? It was addressed to Zach Fagan, Gary, Indiana, in like children's scribble, and inside was $1 and a note that said "Good luck."
I never heard that.
So one last question. Zach tears down the house. Is whatever is their thoughts?
There's an interesting. Now Zach's not going to do this, so I can talk about it. But there was a very interesting thing that happened that got on Chicago radio, and there was this guy who was around Halloween, just before he tore down the house. The Halloween just before that. And he went over there just to, like a lot of people going there just to see what they could get. Now he claimed that this girl came out with a boy. The girl, he found out, was 13, and the boy was 8. But, a ghostly thing. And he says, help us. And he says, how can I help us? I'll help you guys. and he says, "Get us out of here." And he says, well, "How can I do that?" And he says, "We got to go." And he says, "Oh, well, okay." He says, "Come back Halloween." And he says, "I can't," you know. And they left. They said, "I can't come back Halloween," you know. So he says, so he could come back the day before, and so he goes back, and he then sees that he would see them, and he does, and he finds out their brother and sister. They were. He asked if they were, died in the house or were killed, and and then they said they were, and then he asked them if they were sacrificed, and they didn't know what that meant, so they didn't understand that, and then he says, "Oh, we have to go," and then he said, "Well, what's your name?" And the girl's name was Emily, and the boy's name was Chris. He says, "What's your last name?" I said, "Can't tell you." And they said, "Oh, how can I help you?" And so, but they left, and we didn't have anything. But then somehow, a couple of days later, they appear in his bedroom, and they said, "We'll tell you our last name." And and he came and said, "It is." Now we've been trying to find these kids, because they were. It's the mid '80s that they were killed, reportedly, allegedly. It's Emily and Chris, 13 and 8, and their last name is Rosline, Rosline. And we kind of looked in our local records, but there was nothing like that. But they could have been anywhere in the United States and such. And so I tried to get different investigators and such. And and the thing is, you can't really go on missing children because they have to be reported missing. We were going to try, so we don't think they were ever reported missing. They also mentioned that there are 13 of them, and so he told this to the Chicago News, to I think Mancow show, shortly after this, wanting to get in touch with me, and so they said, "Well, okay, we'll put you in touch with the priest," and so they arranged, and I talked to him, and then I got his number, but when I took down his number, when I took down the number, I could never get hold of him again. And I kind of noticed later on that the very final number was supposed to be, I thought it was a 1, and it had a dot here. But I think what happened is that when I made the 9, the paper went with the 9, and then came down. And so I had a 1, but I didn't have the 9. And so he did, so I wanted to, he called me again later, but that's, I think, when I asked for the number. And he said he found out that Zach's tearing down the house. I go, "Tearing down the house?" "When's he going to do that?" He said, "Yeah, he's going to do it this week." And he says he only has 10 names. He has 10 names and last names, but there's 3 more that he can't get, so, and he's worried about that, and so I said, okay, and that's when I took down his number, and that's when that happened. And so I went to call him, and said, "I have a friend who does clear houses, so I did want him to come on over, but I could never get hold of him, and such." And so when the house was torn down, now Zach, he pretty much took all the wood and everything, and he's locked it up, and it's still storing it, and so all there is dirt. Now my friend, he does clear houses, so, and he does it by, he calls on angels to remove anything there. And so when he did do that, I was going around, and it kind of looks pretty bizarre when he does this, so, and we saw, his now wife, was fiancé then, and I were walking around, and all of a sudden this flash came from the sky, and I looked up, what made that? Like that someone took a picture from above, and I was looking to see if there's anything up there, and eventually a plane came by about 5 minutes later. I just wanted to see if it was flashing, like the things, but I could not see it. You could only see it flashing. So I had no idea what that is. And she saw the same thing, and so he says that's when they were all removed. Eventually, the guy that made this call calls me back and says he had a strange thing happen that night. And he called me a couple days later about that. He said all before, his room was super cold and he could not heat it. It would, he tried everything and he just could not heat it, his bedroom. And then one day, he saw Emily with her brother. Emily with another boy. Emily with a boy who wanted to get his sister and didn't want to leave without his sister. And she was in white and he was in white. There were two back there that were in darkness. And he said they wanted to thank him for bringing their brother and sister there. And he said he was hugged by a ghost. I said that was the strangest thing, that Emily hugged him, and that was the last time he ever saw him. And so he said, and then since that time, his room, the heat was normal. So, but we have we got those names. We have all 13 names. The last names of the other 11 are pretty common. So it's the two but we still, to this day, can't verify. We've been kind of looking throughout and every time I talk to, I'm trying to get in birth records, say around the early 70s and mid 70s, Emily and Chris, we just can't find it anywhere. So far we don't have any verification. But as they say, back in the 70s, not everything's put on computer. Some things get destroyed. But we cannot verify that.
Father, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you.
Father Maginot. We didn't get to talk much and really get too much into the story at all, even after an hour and a half. Thank you, Len and JC, also for being with, and we'll have to have a whole day event for just this story. Thank you so much. Are you going to stay for a little while in case anyone has any
I have to leave at 10. That's where my parking pass goes, so I can
Father
stay.
and I will be here for a while. If you have any questions, I'm sure you'd be happy to talk, as well as with Len and JC. So thank you so very much.